Hello, welcome to the panel on ACE experiences in healthcare. We're all so excited to be here right now. Before we get started, just have a quick administrations. On my end, instead of doing a land acknowledgement, I'm going to put a link in the YouTube chat. So this is a map that will show you what native land you are currently on. And since this is a global conference, we're tuning in from all over the world. I figured that would be really useful in case you don't know whose land you are living on right now and things like that. So I would encourage you to check that out. And also for this panel, we are taking questions from Slido. The link for that should be in the YouTube description. Importantly, we are not taking questions from the YouTube comments. You do need to go to Slido. You could submit questions there. You could also upvote other questions that people have posted there. And then we'll use that to rank which questions we answer first. All right, cool. So we'll start with some quick introductions. My name is Krista. Pronouns are she, they. I'm going to be the host for this session. I also, myself, am asexual and have some experiences with healthcare. So you could probably see on my neck, I have a small scar there. That's from when I had my thyroid surgically removed as a result of thyroid cancer. Yay. So I don't make thyroid hormone anymore, so I have to take a pill every day that gives me thyroid hormone. So yeah, ace with hormone problems, woo. Have also got some experiences with doing some medical transitioning. So I recently got approved for top surgery and things like that, which I also want to talk about. And I will kick it over to Gemma. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep. Okay, so I'm Gemma and my pronouns are she, her. And I wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I live and work on, the Wallamedigal people of the Darug Nation. I've included in the chat the equivalent link to Krista's link so that any Australians who want to find out who the traditional owners and the traditional country that they live or work on, they can have a look on there, and there's information about finding out that information. Also, you can check with your local council. They often have that as part of their opening page and stuff. So there's a lot of information out there to find that out if you are interested. Or if you're an international guest in Australia or not, you can have a look at this, and there will be links to the kinds of things that we've been talking about with the acknowledgement of country. So I also want to welcome any First Nations or Indigenous Australians or Indigenous people from anywhere in the world and welcome them to this chat about healthcare, because I know that particularly in Australia, and I mean, I can't speak for them, but I know from the statistics that there is a massive contrast between First Nations healthcare and white Australian healthcare. And I'm sure that's a common thread in a lot of countries as well. And it shouldn't be like that. And I just want to acknowledge my privilege as being from a white, European background in this land where the life expectancy is drastically reduced for our First Nations people, and we need to do better. So I'm on this panel with a couple of hats on. I am here because of my own experiences in healthcare, but also because of, in Kate's research, the reason the healthcare was included was because Kerry and I wanted to look at this information because we were in contact with someone from New South Wales Health, and they had said, look, what you're saying about the needs of asexual people is really important. However, we need some data to back it up. And when we went looking for data that we thought was important to give to them, we couldn't find any. So we thought, let's do a survey. And then Kate was also doing hers, and we put it all together. So the data's come out a little bit later than the conversation we had with them. However, we are still in contact with them because they were at the Human Rights Conference. So they have Kate's report and they've given us their details. So we'll at least be able to continue that conversation with them. And the other hats that I'm wearing is I'm also going to reference some of Kate's research as we go along this conversation. And also my own experiences in healthcare, some positive, some negative, but always trying to make sure that we share these conversations, because an ACE experience with healthcare can be many different things, but being able to tell your health provider in some shape or form that you're outside of the cis-het normativity can be daunting. And I want to show that it's not always going to be a bad experience, but also show when people could have definitely done better.
Awesome. So we also have Cobra as one of our panelists, and I am going to read the intro for them. So Cobra, who uses any pronouns, is a neurodivergent disabled person from Australia. They identify as gender fluid and Aero Ace. They helped on the Aussie Ace Week team in 2021. They like a lot of different things, such as animals, food, and head pats. They also like learning new things and being creative. Most of their experiences in healthcare are with the mental health system and also accessing trans healthcare as an ACE person. I also want to acknowledge we have Jade, who is another ACE with experiences in healthcare, who is currently modding this. So if you're submitting questions on Slido, Jade is taking care of those. All right, I think for our first question, let's start with a general one. What have your experiences with healthcare been like? Can you describe maybe what professionals you have talked to, maybe procedures that you have been interested or gone through, and how has that been as a queer person in healthcare?
Towards me?
Sure, go ahead.
Cool. So I have told my psychologist and my psychiatrist that I'm asexual, and neither of them have had a bad reaction to it. For quite a long time, my psychologist was I thought she was being dismissive, but it was a non-issue, because when I talked to her about the conferences that we've been going to, she has been actively positive and actively enthusiastic and going, this is really great. I'm so glad that you guys are able to do this and you're able to have this platform and that you're able to speak for your community. And so my interpretation of the situation might have been skewed by my assumptions that no reaction is a bad reaction, but turns out I got it wrong, and that's okay. Sometimes we can be a little bit sensitive to a not outwardly enthusiastic feedback from a healthcare professional, because we just kind of okay, well, they obviously don't know what I'm talking about, and we'll just leave it alone. And I can speak on behalf of some of Kate's experiences and her opinions on some topics. So I know that Kate has had some positive experiences and some negative experiences. And when one of the things she's been in the position to be able to do is when she's had a negative experience or somebody who has been actively going, you just need to be fixed in some shape or form, she's had that choice to be able to change providers. Now, not everyone has that choice. And it sucks that so many people don't have the choice or the capacity to change providers. And that probably stops people from voicing it in the first place, because they know that if they do and it goes badly, they don't have another option. So I just wanted to acknowledge that kind of a perspective as well, because it's all very well and good to go, oh, we should be able to tell health providers that we're ACE or wherever we fall under the acronym. But people don't always have that as an option. And I think that's a really important perspective as well. So I know my GP, it hasn't come up as a topic. My general practitioner, my for general stuff, I know that's a term that we use in Australia. Other people have other terms that they use, their primary provider and things like that. It's just not come up as an issue with her because there hasn't been anything to do with it. I mean, she's asked, are you pregnant and things like that, and just taken my word for it. But we've also built up a rapport over the years, and I know that sometimes when you haven't built that rapport, you don't get as positive an answer, or you don't get believed. And that's not fair either. So I know there's a myriad of experiences and things like that. So I think it's important to acknowledge that myself and Krista and Cobra and Jade are only just our own experiences and our own perspectives. And you know, I don't want anyone else to think that their experiences don't count just because they're vastly different.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, your mileage is going to vary with any of this, as we're 3 people and we can't capture where everybody is in the world with all the different healthcare systems and all the different identities people have, because that runs into a lot of issues with healthcare as well. So yeah, thanks for talking about that. I have a cat annoying me.
Cats are fun. Dogs are
yeah.
fun. Bring all the pets. The aces love the pets.
Oh, yes. So Cobra says, I haven't had much experiences in healthcare because I've been too afraid to even speak about asexuality after hearing horror stories, which is a problem in and of itself. However, my psychologist is very affirming of asexuality. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's very good. I hear from a lot of ACEs about horror stories with their therapists, either not being affirming or just not knowing what asexuality is. So I guess my advice would be your therapist should be doing that work and looking up asexuality, aromanticism, any identity really on their own, because your time with them is so limited. If they aren't willing to do that, and if they aren't being affirming of your identities, then don't waste your time. If you can find somebody else, definitely do that, because you're paying them. The situation, like, your needs need to be met with therapy and things like that. I personally, I'm only out to my therapist. I'm not out to any medical professional. I'm nervous they're going to, you know, either blame hormones or things like that. So I don't typically tell any of them. Not because I've had any bad experiences. It's just because it's something that makes me nervous. Cool. I guess we've already touched on this one, but I guess just sort of quick rundown. Have you come out to healthcare workers? Who have you come out to? Are the people that you don't come out to at all, or the people that you definitely come out to?
So I am just trying to pull up Kate's research on this, because the just trying to get this, what is it doing? Here we go. Okay, I found it.
Awesome.
Okay, so this chart here is about the disclosure group. So what professionals did the ACEs in Kate's research, who did they disclose to, regardless of positive or negative experiences? So as you can see, psychologists are the one who most people have disclosed to out of all categories at 57.89%. And then you've got GPs, psychiatrists, gynecology or OB-GYNs, nurses. And then at the very end of the thing, you've got some categories of professionals that I would have thought might have had a bit more disclosure, but the reasons for not disclosing might be why those percentages are quite small. And I mean, the sex therapist, emergency doctor, fertility specialist. Some of the others included a dermatologist. And when looking through the rest of the data, that comes out as some medications that they give for acne can affect whether or not a AFAB person is pregnant at the time. And so they ask, you know, are you pregnant? And often people's experiences are they don't get believed. So this is another lovely little chart about disclosure. So we've got the disclosure group was a number of healthcare providers disclosed to. So as you can see, there is a massive chunk of us that have once or twice to one or two healthcare providers at about 62.45%. And then you've got at least once to a number of healthcare providers or a few times to the same healthcare providers at similar percentages of the group. And the smallest group there is multiple times to every single healthcare provider, which says to me that a lot of ACEs give an attempt to tell somebody at some point, but they kind of, if they don't get that positive feedback from them, then it's difficult to, you know, keep reaffirming it, and you just go, well, it's putting it in the too hard basket, because it's just, they're not going to listen to me, which shouldn't happen in the first place, because your healthcare provider, regardless of why you are there, should be taking your word on your experiences and your sexual orientation, because that's I personally think it's ridiculous that a healthcare provider wouldn't believe you about your own sexual orientation, but like worse things have happened. So I'm just going to show a little bit more, well, just one more. So there's a couple of experiences here that I wanted to read out. So I've got, when I had to go on acne medication in high school, they usually require you to take birth control to ensure that you won't get pregnant on it. I tried to tell the doctor that there was no chance of me engaging in a sexual activity, and she continually didn't believe. When I finally got her to believe me, she kept trying to get me to take birth control anyway. And then I had to jump through a bunch of hoops with the paperwork to be allowed to take acne medication without also taking birth control. It was very frustrating not to be believed. And that was from M from the USA. So it's really tough because there are circumstances outside, gynecology and practices like that where you still have to disclose the fact that you have or haven't had sex. So this is where we're looking at the responses from medical professionals, which ties into being believed. So having a mix of negative and positive or neutral responses is our biggest percentage, and that's that's seen as okay by some people, but I'm like, we should be hoping that at least the majority of them are neutral, if not positive. So when you look at the green section, you've got a mixture of percentages in there. And so, I mean, ideally, we'd like this to all be green. It's one shade of that green in some shape or form. But this is also looking at the averages of someone's experience. So they could very well have some negative in there and some positive, and it's come out more neutral. So ideally, we'd love this to be a green chart. But, it is what it is at this point. And I'm just hoping we can do better in the future.
That's so sad. Like, it's almost a quarter of people that have had negative experiences. That's so disappointing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that anecdote, that, like, as an ace based in the US, that makes a lot of sense to me. Pretty much always before a medical procedure, I have to take a pregnancy test and things like that, which then they charge insurance for. Which is so fun. I actually, sort of tangent because this is a funny story. So the first thyroid surgery I was getting, they had me go take a pregnancy test, but I had been, what's it called? Dehydrated. I was dehydrated because you're not allowed to drink water before a surgery. So I couldn't take the pregnancy test. I got back on the operating table and just told the nurse that if I'm pregnant, it's immaculate conception. And she laughed.
Well, at least she laughed and she didn't berate you or anything like that.
So it could have been worse, but at least it was funny. Yeah, Gemma, do you know where we could get a copy of Kate's report? People are asking.
Yep, I've just put the link in the main chat.
Awesome.
And so it's downloadable from a COW's website by that link. And healthcare is the last section. I think it's section 7. Yeah, section 7. And so the structure of the answers there was very different to the other part, which was designed by Kate, because there was a lot of I statements in there because I wanted to capture ACE experiences, because it's one thing to be like, I have had this experience, but there are also opposing questions like so we can compare who did want children and who didn't, and who disclosed in these contexts, and also questions around what, when you did disclose, what was the responses like, and what were the medical things that they tried to get you to do to rectify the asexuality, or like, offering to take you off certain medications or put you on certain medications and things like that just hadn't been asked. And I think it's really important that we ask these questions, because people don't realize when they're being harmful with this kind of stuff, because like, it's one thing for us to go, yeah, okay, I'm ace, and people go, okay, well, whatever, that's your orientation. We don't like, it's a non-issue. It's another thing for them to be actively trying to treat your asexuality by either taking you off, say antidepressants, or putting you on a medication because they've assumed that you've got hypoactive sexual disorders and things like that. So I guess it's go.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's an important point that asexuality was included in the DSM under hyposexual drive disorder, and it's only recently that you sort of got a little footnote in that disorder saying if you identify as asexual, then this doesn't count as a disorder. And there's a number of caveats to that, one being you have to know about asexuality in order for that to not be diagnosable and things along that line. And it's really striking how recent that happened, given how long asexuality has been around for.
And even though asexuality has been around before we had a label to describe it, like, I mean, as I've said multiple times over this conference, I've been out since 2005. And like, even then, you know, we had Avon and it had a couple of thousand people on it. And we're still having to explain what it is to people as a bare basics of like, no, it's just not because sex is icky. No, it's just not because I'm not interested. Like, I just don't feel like it. I don't find other people, there is a lack of attraction there to other people on some scale, and trying to get up when you are able to find a way to explain it to them, whether they're healthcare or not, and they get it, they're like, oh yeah, I know people like that, because people don't know the term, so they just think that they just assume that they're some variety of normal. And what is normal anyway?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Loaded question.
Normal is just a word.
All right, so we're about half an hour in. Keep submitting questions over on Slido. We've got a couple rolling in so far. So I think let's start with this one since it's related. How do you decide when to disclose your ACE identity to healthcare providers?
So I know for Kate, her motto is, if they don't accept that I'm ACE, I'm out of there. But she also lives in the capital of Australia. And when it comes to being a progressive place, Canberra is, you know, pretty decent in general to being able to do that. But she also acknowledges that that's not possible for everyone. I know that I have, as I said, I've disclosed to my psychologist and my psychiatrist, and it's either gone over their head or they've just gone, okay, it's not an issue. It has, you know, they're not pathologizing me. There's no active, you know, medicalization of it. So that's good enough in my book, because I don't want to have to go with, that's the bit I don't want to deal with. And it doesn't actually matter to me that they're not actively including it in my healthcare. If I needed them to, I'd make a point about it, but I don't need them to. I'm been out long enough that I'm not questioning a lot of the parts of my identity when it comes to that. And I mean, I know, like, having a child, and because I have a son and he's 7, and having a child and being ACE and saying that, again, all of my providers know I have a kid. And I would not hesitate to disclose that I have a female partner either. Like, and I know none of my main people that I see have a problem with any of that, because it's just, and again, I come from a capital city because I'm originally from Sydney, and so a lot of like when you're in the capital cities, particularly in Australia, you've got a lot more choices of healthcare providers. So deciding when to disclose, I mean, it's a personal thing, but I think that being able to disclose is very important. And I would think that if you need your healthcare provider to know something about asexuality for healthcare choices, or if you're trans, or whatever your healthcare need is, if it relates to a healthcare need, then I think you need to be upfront if you can, if it's possible, because the sooner you know where they stand on it, the sooner you know what your choices that you may or may not need to make are, so that you can have the best healthcare possible. And I mean, if you don't need to disclose and it's not going to affect your life, then by all means, don't disclose if you can't. Like, don't put yourself in harm's way just for the need to disclose unless you feel that you need to, because I know that the people are quite scared of disclosing because they're expecting to not be believed. But I also know that we did get plenty of people who had disclosed and were surprised that they were believed. And we're happy about disclosing. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times we're expecting the worst in those sort of, it's a high stakes situation. Am I going to get healthcare? Am I going to get the care that I need? So it is always a nice surprise. But Cobra also, you know, agrees with like the sentiment that can be very scary because they say, I have no idea when to disclose. It's very scary. They try, if it's relevant, to do what they need for their experience, but also try not to disclose in case they change things medically if they mention it. Otherwise, they don't really need to know for safety, and just sometimes it's not relevant, which I would agree with a lot. I only disclose if it's relevant, which at this point, it's really only my therapist and nobody else needs to know. Um, People do ask a lot, like, how sexually active are you? Which is really weird, especially if you're not doing something related to any of that. But I mostly just say I'm not sexually active, and they haven't questioned that, which is good. I'm not sure if that counts as coming out or not, but it is also something that impacts a lot of ace people.
So I've got a pretty chart about this too. I have lots of charts. There's 112 charts in Kate's report, and it's
Ooh, we love charts.
and it's 200 pages long. Yes, charts are amazing. So I am going to share my screen again.
Yeah.
Okay, so where is this window? Just trying to find, I've got lots of tabs, so I just have to find the one that is the actual report itself. Sorry, give me a moment.
Gotta love online conferences. I've got like 50 tabs
It's
open.
like, here, do this thing and have a pretty chart. And okay, so here is a chart about the disclosure group about immediate reactions upon disclosure.
Ooh.
So at the top, our biggest chunk of people was some of my experiences were positive, which we love. We love this.
Yeah.
And then we've got all of my experiences were positive at 26.18%. So between the two of them, we're looking at just between that around that sweet spot around 50-55%. So, and then they've got the other green options are they gave me resources about asexuality, and they made an attempt to find out about asexuality before our next appointment. And I made sure that question was included there because I wanted to capture, do these health professionals go out of their own way to find out about something that their patient has told them? And I'm glad that we've got some people in there that is their experience because we love this for them. Love it. But when you add this up, we're looking at barely over 65% of people having a positive to neutral reaction upon upon the disclosure of their asexuality. We'd like this to be higher. It would be lovely for it to be higher. And the stat that I really breaks my heart is they completely dismiss my asexuality, which is the biggest red chunk, and that's at 27.29%. And that, to be honest, should be zero. In a civilized society, if you're a decent human being, you should.
In the year of our Lord 2023.
Yeah, exactly. We shouldn't. Nobody. I mean, it's one thing to ignore what they say. It's another thing entirely to be actively harmful to somebody about them disclosing part of themselves. There should not be any. It should not be a harmful process to disclose that you're asexual. So there's the other responses that people had is this lovely detailed chart here. As I said, Kate loves her charts. So as you can see, we have some really good green responses in big chunks. So this is percentages of the whole group, not an addition into 100%. So, so we've got believed me when I said asexuality was my sexual orientation, and that's 45.71%. And I love that. However, the next biggest chunk is red, and misunderstood asexuality to be about libido, interest, celibacy, etc., etc. And it's really disappointing that those two stats are so close in percentage, and that the red is in this tiny little thing, But I want to take the best out of this chart, and I really like that the majority of the green responses are bigger than the red responses on this chart. So I think that says to me that there is some positive in the fear. There is some positive in it disclosing, and some of the fear may not necessarily be warranted. Some of it may be, but those green numbers could be way better than that. And I want our health professionals to do better than that.
Yeah.
And I know that when Kate and I work better together, the Australian National Queer Conference, that we had psychologists, we had therapists, we had doctors and other healthcare providers in the sessions we did on healthcare. And they were horrified by the stats. And the biggest percentages I have of negative responses have come from psychologists and therapists and things like that. Mm-hmm. So they were like, oh my God, we need to, like, as a profession, we need to do better than this. We need to be able to do better than this and support asexuals in a much more affirming way than we currently do as a entire profession. So we're looking at doing some training with the actual organizations that approve them becoming psychologists and doctors and such forth, trying to get in before they become those roles, so they're already they're competent before they have to deal with someone who is asexual, and then they have to teach them ACE 101.
No, that would be so great to have like required trainings for these people, because I bet the way it currently is that they're not having any sort of training on LGBTQ identities.
Exactly. I know that ACON, which was originally a HIV prevention organization in New South Wales, but now just looks more at sexual health and stuff. They do pride training, and they came and talked to Kate and I at the Human Rights Conference. And they said the reason they hadn't included the A on their acronym is not because they didn't want to include the A, but they didn't feel that they knew enough or were experienced enough in ACE issues and asexual health to add it on there. They didn't want it to be lip surface. And I gave them really positive feedback on that. And I said, look, I really appreciate that you didn't just tack on the A, because I know sometimes when the A is not there, we assume the worst. And it's really good to hear from the actual organizations that the reason they're not including the A is not because they don't want to, it's because they don't want it to be tokenistic. So
that is so great. Like, I feel like you so often see it the other way around, where people will say, oh, we're so LGBTQIA friendly, and then they have all these horrible practices.
And then it's just a token gesture because they feel obligated to do it, and they don't have any ACE representation or anything, and you're just like going, why bother? If you're not going to support us, actively support us, why do you bother? Like, exactly, Ren. Like, so many professions don't get queer training. And I know one of the goals of Kate and I and the rest of the ECHAO team is we want to be able to facilitate ACE 101 training. We want to have resources that a nurse or a doctor or a psychologist, if they're looking for something on asexuality, we will have a education resource hub of some description where they can go and get that information with free of charge if they want to learn that themselves. But we're also looking at doing like training or providing, like, if you want to include asexuality in training, here is a module to add to your pride training. Here's a pretty little thing that, this is what the community of the asexual community wants you guys to know. So, and being able to provide that, because I think it's vastly important. And for so long, we've just kind of been in our little ACE bubble and hoping and wishing that people will know enough about asexuality by now to be informed. And there is obviously a very big gap between what we want and what we should expect from healthcare providers, to be frank, and what they know and their capacity to create the content to train their people. But at least if we can go, look, this is what we want, this is what you guys as a bare minimum should be telling your med students, telling your trainee psychologists and what have you, about asexuality, at least we are covering all bases, and then it's not the burden on an individual ACE, hopefully in the long term, will not be quite so big to do the ACE 101, which is part of, I feel that it's unfair that ACEs are always having to do the ACE 101. And I said to so many people, look, we've done the ACE 101. I've been out since 2005. I want to do ACE 102. And Kate feels exactly the same. It's just like, can we do 102 now? Like, please. Surely everybody has
just move a little bit up from definitions and things. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
just please just look at the bare basics of the definition and just let us talk about our experiences, not just have to define it all the time. You know?
Yeah, because our existence
exactly,
shouldn't
that's what the
be
internet is
explaining,
for.
yeah, what it's for. Cobra says that's what the internet is for, the ACE 101, which is,
Exactly.
Google is free.
Exactly. Well, and then people, if you say, oh, well, Google is free to somebody, it's just like, are they going to bother? And so you feel like if I don't do the ACE 101, then are they going to get the right information? Are they just going to get the answer of it's, no sexual attraction? Or are they going to get little to no sexual attraction? Or are they even going to hear about Demi and Gray?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Which, by the
so
way, we
you
have a
feel
panel on later.
obliged to do the ACE 101 for your community.
Yeah. Oh, Jade also says when she told her psych, she tried to train me out of it. Needless to say, I didn't go back, which props to you.
Oh,
Jade
absolutely.
also says, at this point, I just want to have it as a voice recording so I don't have to say the same thing over and over again. That is so fun. Yeah, you walk into a doctor's meeting and you just hit a button and a little recorded voice goes, I am asexual. Asexuality is.
I was just going to say, Kate has a little card in her wallet that says, if I'm having a seizure. And I feel like we need to have like a little ACE 101 card. You ask the question, here, I'm not giving you a verbal answer. You read this, or this is all you get.
It's an actual like ACE card, like a gay card.
Yeah, here is my ACE card. Read this. This is the definition. This is what it means. Now talk to me like a human being.
Oh, man. All right. Well, good discussion. Thank you, whoever asked that. We went on a couple tangents, but that was really great. All right. So I think for the next question, let's talk about this situation. When a healthcare worker says something aphobic, what do you do?
Oh, that is a very loaded question.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, go ahead.
I know that some people I know that like when somebody says something to me, even if it's nothing to do with asexual, and they are that level of dismissive about something that I've said, that I tend to kind of shut down, just go, and get very like, I get upset on the inside and I'm just like, I just want to get out of there because I'm going to cry because I'm not really good with one-on-one confrontation. Like angry internet, that's fine, but someone in my face going, your orientation is a load of shit, like that's very confronting for anybody, let alone just me. And so like the experiences that people have when someone is being some level of acephobic, I know that in the research that some of the statements that people said happened to them is that they've been diagnosed with a hypoactive sexual desire disorder, or referred to a sex therapist at that's only 3.19% for the sex therapist. So that's not bad, but it still shouldn't, that shouldn't be you're asexual, here, have sex therapy. But then again, such a large percentage of the ace community doesn't have sex, so you also have to think of that out of that kind of number as well. And so there's also been people that have been prescribed medications to improve libido, and been referred to a specialist I did not need due to pathologization of my sexuality. Now, I know stuff like that when healthcare providers make decisions about your healthcare because they have perceived that there's a problem with it when you said that you were ace, is something that I know a lot of aces are afraid of and are concerned about. And so that percentage was only 5.54. So that's not, again, terrible, but again, we may not be encapsulating the whole ace experience there, because there's also parts of it saying, undergone a psychiatric evaluation or a mental health assessment, which I cannot believe that's still, and there's a number on there, which is 5.82, and then there's, having your hormone levels tested and having to take a pregnancy test. And despite explaining that there was no risk of being pregnant, which we touched on earlier, and being, and having been given instructions or homework to do with my sex life or lack of sex life. and those are all, and those ones are all in that 11 to 12% range. And one good one there's 3 good answers on here, and I will touch on them as well. So better understood myself and my asexuality was 12.88%. Discovered my healthcare provider had a good grasp on LGBTQIA issues was 19.53%. And had a good relationship with my healthcare provider where they understand I am asexual and this is normal was the biggest percentage we had at 44.6%. So that's amazing that we had close to 50% in there, but there's also that other 50% that didn't occur to. So it's had to continue seeing this healthcare provider anyway, as I did not have another option, was 16.2. And have been unsuccessful in finding an asexuality competent healthcare provider, 15.65. And having to change it into a new healthcare provider just shy of 14%. So those are the main, results that we got out of that. And so there's a big, big range there,
Yeah.
And I mean, we should, anybody in society should be able to go to a healthcare provider and have a good experience, regardless of what you disclose about yourself. Like whether it's a trauma, whether it's, a health thing that you think is a bit weird, whether it's your orientation or your romantic relationships or anything that comes relevant in your healthcare, you should not be getting any sort of negative response from healthcare. And when we talked at the Better Together conference about these things, there was some definite understanding that this is not just an asexual experience, like it reflects a lot of people's experiences with healthcare, that these comments come out through whether it be ignorance or deliberate active negativity or harm being caused to people, and it's tough because sometimes you have to disclose and sometimes you don't have any choice but to disclose, or you don't have any other options to go to if that goes badly. So I can totally understand why people would hesitate talking about it. And then because there's that level of, well, if I disclose and it goes badly, what can I possibly do about it? And if the answer is nothing, you're not going to end up disclosing because you don't have a backup plan.
Yeah.
And that lack of backup plan, or being able to have a backup plan at all in case it goes badly, that's not an option for a lot of people. So sometimes people make the choice not to disclose when they might have otherwise done so because they don't want to hear that aphobic rhetoric. And I mean, as far as what you can say, I mean, I would personally, like if it was me, I would personally say, look, I understand that you don't think this is legitimate. I understand that you don't feel that this is, a relevant thing or that it's exists. Because I mean, that's generally the kind of thing people are expecting to have happen with their, and just going, but this is a part of me. And if you can't accept that, then this topic is not up for discussion.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a really good middle ground. If you have to
if you have to disclose and you don't have an other option, go, look, this is healthcare that I need. I am not here to discuss this. I am not here for your opinions about what you think or you don't think about my orientation. My healthcare is what we're here for, and you need to respect that part of me. And even if we never speak of it again, because we obviously don't see eye to eye, I'm not going to have a debate with you about this. And that takes guts to say that, though.
Yeah.
It takes balls to be able to say that to someone in a position of authority. And I know that's not going to work for everybody. So that's why I tend to kind of go into panic mode when I actually, if I say it and somebody reacts badly to it, I just go, I'm just not going to bring it up again. But if you can stand up for yourself and just go, we're not discussing this. It's the same thing when people try to pull you up on your weight. It's not necessarily relevant to your healthcare because you're coming in to talk about, your teeth, or you're coming in to talk about your broken toe. And I'm sorry, but skinny people and fat people and everything in between can have these health things. It is not necessarily about your weight, or it's not necessarily about sexual orientation. Like, you know, you go in for a broken arm and they ask you, oh, how did you do that? And you tell them and they're like, oh, well, you need to lose weight, or you need to do this, or you need to, make sure you stretch, or whatever it is. And it's just like, you're not looking at the whole picture. What if that person has a family history of arthritis? What if that person has a family history, has a genetic condition? It's not trying to shove people into boxes with their healthcare harms people, because there are so many facets, to people's healthcare, and just going off one part of it because that's the bit they want to focus on does nobody any favors anywhere. It's harmful to everybody, regardless of what that thing happens to be.
Yeah, it's like what we were talking about earlier. Medical processes tend to be very much like, here is the problem that I'm going to latch onto, and we're going to try and fix that, whether that's your sexuality or your weight or whatever. And I've heard from other, I believe it was obesity advocates, something around that, where they suggest walking into your doctor's office, have a list of things that you aren't going to talk about, which could be your weight, it could be your libido, it could be your sexuality, things like that. And if they bring it up, say, okay, we're not discussing treatment for that. So if that wasn't an option, what else would you tell me? Something along those lines. And I think
that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I think just having that amount of like prep work can be really helpful when it comes to advocating for yourself.
I think that's an amazing idea. Like, having, if you don't have the balls to have it, as I so eloquently put it, having something written down saying, this is what I am willing to talk about, this is what I'm not willing to talk about, and having it on a piece of paper that you can just go, look, I'm here to talk about A, B, and C. Everything else is off the table. I will not be discussing those topics. I understand that you may think that they're related to what we're talking about, but I don't need to see you for those things. I am already addressing them here, or whatever you need to say to get them off your back. Yeah. Tell them you're addressing it elsewhere, because that's probably the one that's going to get them to back off if they think that someone else is already looking after it. I'm not advocating lying, but just stretching the truth a little bit so that you don't have to keep defending yourself.
Yeah.
Because, if they think it's being addressed elsewhere, they might be more willing to back off on those topics. But yeah, like being able to have that and go, meh, I'm not talking about that.
Yeah. So Cobra has also chimed in saying that they've never experienced a healthcare worker saying something aphobic, and they're glad, which honestly, awesome. Good for you. Cobra also has experience with a healthcare worker not knowing what it is, but willing to research it. So that's a happy ending, which is also amazing. And should keep in mind, there's also those happy things. Jade also says, run if a healthcare worker says something aphobic. Just kidding. If it's due to confusion, then she'll try to explain. But if it's actively malicious, then I either ignore them or leave. Yeah, I think that jives nicely with what we were saying, where, I mean, if you can, leave. If you can't, there's some ways to try and navigate that situation.
So Kate has just stepped out of my room to touch base because she's been hearing this conversation. Mm-hmm. And she was just saying to me that part of our education stuff is having the resources for people to grab and go. And she hadn't thought about making a patient advocacy pamphlet that ACEs can get and give to their doctor about this, so that they can turn around and go, no, this is what it is. And having that, being able to hand that to their, like we were looking at, having it accessible for healthcare providers, but patient advocacy as well. So ACEs would be able to take the resource and take it to their doctor and go, this is what you need to know about this, da-da-da-da-da. So she just wanted to add that bit in there. So that's something that we will definitely be looking at providing and having it accessible to everyone to just download onto their phone or however you want, and being able to take it and go with it.
Yeah, very similar to the ACE card we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Here, take this. Shut up about my ACE, unless I tell you it's actually
educate yourself.
So that I don't have to do ACE 101 and tell your friends.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you, whoever submitted this question. I think that's a really important conversation to be having.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is, because so many times everyone's like, oh yeah, you got to advocate for yourself. It's like, but what do you do when you do this and it doesn't go according to plan?
Yeah.
You know, like, and there's no one answer either.
Oh yeah, definitely depends on individual situations. All right, let's go to, this is sort of a similar question, but from the other side of the conversation. How would you recommend a medic to start a conversation about your asexuality if relevant?
Well, I think that anyone who's in the healthcare, anything like that, that if somebody comes to them and says something that kind of triggers that, oh, this person might be ace and they might not know it, and then they could go, look, I mean, honestly, like we've had a couple of examples of it happening in media, like in sex education. And I can't remember the character's name, but she comes to the sex therapist and, you know, it's like, I think I might be broken. And that person being, you know, ace competent enough for it to trigger the little, oh, this person might be ace, and, you know, going, look, you know, have you considered that you might be asexual? Or just going, look, you know, asking a few questions around like, you know, have you had sex? Because sometimes that is like the main, like no one has, sometimes people haven't even thought about whether or not the sexual attraction part is there. They're just looking at the, you know, like, well, I haven't had sex. And then they go, oh, hang on, maybe it's because I haven't experienced sexual attraction. But they're still at that baby ace stage, as you will, you know. And so kind of asking those questions, if relevant to the context of, you know, going, have you considered this? And having a resource that person, that ace competent health professional can give them, that isn't just like, you might be asexual and here's a tiny little paragraph and see you later. But, you know, having a resource available to be able to talk through it with them and go, you might not be ace, but I wanted to give you this information so you can think about it, so you can consider it, and maybe it be something that you look into if you think it's relevant for you.
And under no circumstances use the phrase late bloomer.
Yeah, absolutely.
No late bloomer, no, you know, do you think you're repressed? You know, none of that stuff. I mean, like making sure that the language that they choose is affirming, even if they don't turn out to be ace, but just saying whatever your orientation or however you experience sexual attraction is valid, and I'm not here to change who you are. I'm not here to make you do anything or be anything that you're not. I just want to give some information to help you understand yourself a little bit better in whatever context that may be. And just, you know, being supportive where you need to be, and giving the patient time to think about it and not just put them on the spot about, so do you think you're ace? You know, like people, I mean, we all know that it's finding out that ace is a thing, and then coming to terms with working out where you fit under the umbrella are two very different things, and take everyone different amounts of time to do that. Yes, and definitely one of the other things Jade was just saying in our chat about it being, do you think it's because of trauma? Do not say that. They may have trauma. The trauma may have come from their asexuality. Their asexuality may have come from trauma, although that is a much, much smaller percentage. And that is a bit of a passion project of Kate's. She's a very big advocate for aces who have experienced trauma, but it doesn't matter how you came to asexuality, whether it was because of trauma or not, whether it was because of medication or not, your asexuality is still valid and you still count. And that's a big thing that I think is really important, is it how you came to work out that you were asexual. It doesn't matter. As long as you think you're asexual, then you fit under the umbrella, and that you are part of our community, and we will support you however you got there. And even if you're not there yet, questioning is totally fine as well. And if you change your mind and work out you're not ace, you're still part of the community until you say so.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Cobra put a really interesting couple comments in the YouTube chat. So, yes, ace people also aren't a science experiment to be prodded at.
No, that's very true.
Yeah, research is good, but I'm also concerned about ace people being dehumanized or exploited, which I think is very valid with a lot of research that goes on, not even just with asexuality, but with a lot of queer identities in general.
Very much so, yes. I know that one of the reasons that Kate even did her research is because she wanted to validate and back up her experiences as an ace who had experienced trauma.
Yeah.
And that she couldn't find any research or anything to back what her stories up, but she'd had stories from people, and when she discloses her experiences, the aces come over to her and said, "You're the first person I've heard talk about this. I've been through this." And she wanted a way to quantify and qualify that because nobody was doing it.
Yeah,
and
that's the thing.
Yeah,
sorry,
so
go ahead.
like, sorry, and being able to show that to outside of the ACE community. I mean, she's done this with no funding. She's done this off the back of like her own research. She spent 2 years writing this. This is her baby, and she made sure she had a hard copy of it before we went to our conferences. It's thick, but it's been really an awesome experience, the feedback we've gotten from it from non-aces. Like, we actually had somebody read the report overnight from the 2 days, like in between the 2 days of the first conference. They came up to Kate the second day and went, "Oh, I've read your report." And she went, "What do you mean?" They're like, "Yeah, I've read it overnight." And we're like, "All 200 pages?" Yes, it was really fascinating because the people who need the data don't have it as an easily accessible resource. And that's why, like, the Better Together conference, the guy who runs it is like, we're always going to have somebody in the opening plenary who's ace, because he is giving us a platform in Australia to be able to speak out for the ace community, in the health, in health, but also just in general. And I'm so thankful that Jason is so damn supportive, because as a long-term outcomes for Australian asexuals, having an in with somebody running the national queer conference is invaluable as a long-term support system to advocate for asexuality. So, and I hope that in other countries, people can form those connections with conferences and things like that. Please, one thing I would love to say is, particularly so that the medics and the healthcare providers can see the ace people, is that there often conferences have scholarships or ways that you can attend where you pay little to no money. And that's one of the things that Jason advocates for, that almost 50% of attendees for Better Together paid nothing to attend, and they still were in the black. So they're obviously doing something right there. And so please look for any conferences to do with LGBTQIA stuff. And even if you can't present, attend, wear flag colors, wear something that people will then go, "Oh, you're asexual," and they might have heard of it and come and talk to you. And then you can give them a resource without having to be the one actively doing the outreach and harassing them all. I mean, Kate and I harass them, but that's because that's what we're like. But not everybody is good at public speaking or advocating for themselves. But if we are present, if we attend, if we are visible, those that can, then like other people will see that. And then if there's regular aces at these things and people see that, more aces might attend. And so the next Better Together is in Geelong, which is only about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from Melbourne. So one thing I really want to do is get a contingent of, even if it's just Melbourne-based aces, to come with Kate and I to go to Better Together and have a contingent of aces from Australia attend, and not just those of us that are presenting, but having attendees that are ace, and getting ace perspectives heard in discussions and things. Because most of the time, from my experience anyway, when we've been part of the queer community in person, most of the people have been receptive. Online is a very different story.
Mhm.
And I know that some people's experiences in person can be very different. But at these conferences, I have not come across, the people that I have come across that have been dismissive have very much been in the minority. And those that have been affirming or positive or interested have very much been in the positive and very much been the majority. So I suppose it's one way that we can start that conversation with them is go to the things that they are at and be present and be visible and be seen, as even if it's just waltzing around with, asexuals are valid attached to your bag, or however you do it. Just being seen is so important, so that others can go, oh, hang on, I want to know more about this. That person, like trying to draw those connections. And even if you are uncomfortable with doing the ACE 101, send them to the resources that or give them our website. Like so many, we had bespoke business cards, i.e. I printed them on cardboard on my printer. And so we handed out, I don't know, like 30 or 40 business cards each at both conferences, just to people that came and talked to us. And, half of them may not even come back and talk to us, but those that do, we've given them something to think about,
Yeah, I mean, I know we have a panel on ACE research coming up next, but I know
we do.
Yeah, myself, I don't research asexuality, but my day job is I'm a genetics PhD student, and like every like decade or so, some guy pops up with like, I'm gonna find the gay gene, time to study the genetics of queer people. And it is so important to have queer voices whenever that gets proposed, because it can be so exploitative, and it's ridiculous. I also want to note, Jade says, listen, that's all I really want. Learning and understanding is fantastic, but the minimum I want is for them to listen. Cobra says, just respond with, I've already found the right people and it's my chosen family. Yeah. And
really good response.
Yeah.
I love that response. Like, I love hearing other people's responses to the questions that people on panels like us get asked, because I can only come up with the stuff in my brain, but it's awesome to hear alternatives that are just as awesome, because you go, oh, that's a really good idea. I should use that, like,
yeah.
and it's not always you thought of. So it's really good to hear other people's ways of handling these things. I just wanted to pull up something that was said in the chat that Morokai said that I'm 56. I think the bloom is long gone. That the late bloomer thing has been, like I'm 40 and Kate is 36, and there are a lot of older races, which is also something we have coming up, and you'll see me on that one as well. I may be modding, I may be talking, I may be doing both, but I will be there. And like the late bloom thing is, to be honest, a joke, because it's like, how long do you wait till this, bloom is over? Like, when do you go, okay, we're past the late bloom, we're getting into ancient bloom here, like
ancient bloom. All right. So just letting everybody know, we are about an hour in. We'll probably go for like another 15 minutes. If you have any questions that we have not gotten to, please put them in the Slido. We're going to do our best to at least touch on a whole ton of different things. Also, I forgot to say, medics starting conversation about asexuality, for the most part, if it's not relevant, don't. I don't want to hear it. And what is it even relevant for most of the time? So
that is very, very true, Krista. Like, I mean, if the medic is coming across someone who may not know about their asexuality and has inkling that maybe, like they want to talk to their patient, not because they want to medicalize them, but they're just like, it would be good for them to know about it.
Yeah.
Like, I want them to be, I would love medical people to know that it's okay to start the conversation with them, even if they go, oh no, I'm whatever, like touching on it and just bringing it up, but not harping on about it and trying to box them in. And it's a fine line, I'm sure, because, like making sure that people are being respectful on both sides of the conversation. But I think that medical people, one of the ways that we can get ACEs who may not have realized they are ACE to find out about it is making sure that they're hearing about it from medical staff who are ACE competent, who understand that they may not be ACE, but letting them know that it's an option for an orientation if they're talking to them about, you know, some things that they may be having some issues they might be having in their relationship, that it's not just, oh, well, you're just afraid of sex. And it's not just, oh, well, you just need to practice, you know, you need to go home and have some sex therapy and things like that. Being able to go, look, it could be one of these things, and one of those options, it might be that you are asexual, or it might be that you're grey sexual. Because I'm certain, I am 100% certain that the percentages that people have found of asexuals in the general populace are not accurate. Because there are plenty of people who still don't know what the hell it is. There are plenty of people who are still realizing that they're ace, whether they are young, whether they are old, whether they're in the middle. They don't realize that there's a different way to look at relationships, and there is a different way to approach sexual attraction, and that they just assume that if you're romantically attracted to somebody, therefore the sexual attraction must come hand in hand. And they don't always marry up for people. And being able to understand that both from a ACE competent therapist and a baby ACE, you know, is so vitally important for everybody to be able to support each other.
Absolutely. Agree with all of that. I think on that note, let's move on to this question. If you've had the experiences of dealing with gender-affirming medical care, does your ACE identity play into that at all? So I could start this one off a little bit. So I've started trying to get a hysterectomy, so having consultations for that and things along those lines. And it is amazing how many people ask you about your sexual activity when you're trying to get your reproductive organs removed, which you would think, like, if you're getting them removed, it's kind of clear you don't want them. But yeah, pretty much like you've got to do a variety of like appointments for this sort of thing. So there's consultation where you're talking to a surgeon, and the surgeon I talked to was very, very affirming of gender identities and asexuality and things like that. But you do have to have kind of an in-depth discussion on like, well, what are you expecting out of the surgery and things like that. So you have to talk about, hey, are you having sex? How are you having sex? And how frequently is that happening? Things along those lines. You also, well, I think there's a variety of ways to do this. What I did was I got an ultrasound of my uterus, and this was done by a separate physician, where I also had to go over like my sexual activity with them and things like that. So none of it was like openly negative, but it's a lot of rehashing. No, I don't have sex. No, I don't want this organ in my body. Please remove it, and things like that. Cobra says, people ask that. It's important. It's in all capitals, just so that we're all clear. Yeah. I think Cobra's a pass on this question. Gemma, do you have any experiences?
I have some stats from Kate's report to discuss. So we're looking at where we ask questions about medical experiences related to asexuality, libido, and whether or not people wanted children. And so 7.94% of respondents were denied a hysterectomy or similar. 0.42 were denied a vasectomy or similar, but we've also got to look at the fact that that was only 7 respondents for the vasectomy question. So that looks like 3.21 of those assigned male at birth and 9.19% of those assigned female at birth. But that's also not taking into consideration that people may not have been asked this question, you know. And I mean, I know that through the cis-het medical experience from my own perspective, that many, many women who have wanted a hysterectomy, and regardless of what age they've been, have been denied it because people assume you're going to have kids, you're going to want kids, you're going to have that, you're going to have that, and you might regret it. And given that a hysterectomy is quite permanent, you know, they hesitate. And even when the you know, person who was assigned female at birth has several children already, you know, and they're like, look, I don't want any more. So many times they get denied the hysterectomy multiple times by multiple professionals just in case, you know. And it's like, when do we respect people enough to make that decision for themselves and just be like, well, you might regret this later, but this is very permanent. And they go, well, I know, duh, I still want it. Then they go, okay, as long as we've got informed consent here, I can't see any reason why you shouldn't be able to make that choice for yourself. And I wanted to read up our couple of stories from the report about stuff to do with the with gender affirming care or not getting gender affirming care. So I've got so my first one that I'm going to read out, I've just got to get to the right spot. So I've got here is when I went to a gender therapist to try to begin my transition the first time, once I revealed I was asexual, the therapist refused to put me forward for gender therapy, would not believe me when I said I was asexual due to sexual abuse, and made the entire session about trying to fix my asexuality. I did not get to begin my transition until 5 years later, during which time I attempted to unalive myself and harm myself. And that's from CK from the UK. So we're not talking about some backwater country, not backwater country, I mean like a third world healthcare system here. We're talking about one of the bigger, you know, more prominent free universal healthcare countries there. And another example of discrimination was I was denied to access healthcare because I'm asexual. My GP wouldn't refer me to a gynecologist despite my family history of reproductive issues, or let me get the HPV vaccine because I'm asexual and therefore didn't need it. And that's from Percy from the USA.
Excuse me. You need the HPV vaccine.
And so Kate went and asked a sexual health clinic whether or not, like in the ACT, whether or not ACEs who hadn't had sex or had not had penetrative sex, whether or not they needed to get a cervical screening if they were AFAB. And I will have to pull up her Twitter to double check what her answer was. And I'm pretty sure that it was a matter of that you should still get it because you can get HPV from, you know, a variety of things. It might not be as common if it's not penetrative sex, but, you know, the experience is that, you know, like you need to look after your own healthcare, you know, because nobody else, unfortunately, is going to do it for you.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people, a lot of ACEs with cervixes have that question. And yeah, it's good to get yourself screened regardless, because you can get it outside of just having sex. It's not comfortable, but you should still do it at least once.
And I know that Kate, for example, she spoke to the sexual health person about some issues that she had regarding pain and things like that for those kind of procedures. And I know, at least in Australia, you don't have to have a full pap smear anymore. You can. There is a self-administered cervical screening test in Australia, and particularly if you haven't had a cervical screening in the last couple of years, they encourage you to do the test yourself. So I'll read out her thread that she wrote about it, just so that people are aware. So she said, first up, I'm 36 and have never had a cervical screening because my doctors would never agree if I needed one. Male GPs weren't comfortable ascertaining whether I had experienced the amount to sex, plus several times I've been refused a test. Well, I should have gone 10 years ago. If you have had any sexual contact, and that's in capitals, you need to get a cervical screening. So yes, ACEs, that means if you have tried and failed, you need that test. If any person has put any part of themselves in there, the bacteria that causes the human papillomavirus may have been passed on. But I had the vaccine for HPV. Good stuff. Glad to hear it. That vaccine protects you from about 70% of the HPV strains, which is excellent. But for the other 30, we need those screenings. Now, I know that sounds scary, but here's the good news. There's a self-test. They give you a little swab and send you off to their toilet to get the sample yourself. Then you bring it back and they pop it off for testing. No scary devices. No doctor or nurse looking at all your personal area. Unfortunately, I have fine motor issues and a tremor. And if you're like me and can't do the self-test, or it's not available where you are, the old pap smear test is gone too, at least where I live. Nowadays, they don't need to scrape, such a scary word, cells. They just need to get that little swab and they can get a tiny bit of DNA. Content warning. Sexual assault and genital mention. I'm a survivor of sexual assault and have something called vaginismus. All the muscles clench defensively, and if anything's there, I'm telling you because it's not talked about and it should be. So I was very scared about my test. But the nurse said that I was right to come to the sexual health clinic and not my doctor. Your family doctor can do a test, but if you're like me, plus have a complicating factor, go to a clinic where they do cervical screenings all day long. They've had way more practice. I'm not going to lie, the test was painful, but for most people it should be a little uncomfortable and then over. The nurse was very experienced and very kind and knew how to treat an SA survivor who was scared. So to recap, if you need the test and you've had any sexual contact, condoms are irrelevant. If you can get the self-test, you may find that much easier and more comfortable. And if not, for most people, it shouldn't be uncomfortable but not painful. So please take care of your body. So that's a really good healthcare, also affirming healthcare position, as well as a really good explanation of why it's important for ACEs who may have had any sort of sexual contact in any sort of way to make sure they do get tested for these healthcare and gender specific, AFAB specific things, but also there are AMAB specific things that people should get tested for. And if you've had any contact of any sexual contact in any shape or form, it's better to be safe than sorry. If you can do it and you think that you need to, get it done, because we all need to look after ourselves and we all need to make sure that we are the best ACEs that we can be. And part of that is taking care of sexual health things that might be really uncomfortable to painful to excruciating. At least then you have an answer and you know, and you're not wondering whether or not it counts or whether or not you've experienced that. And you've just, if you can, you should, I think. And I really like that that's an option here in my country. And I know that it's not necessarily an option in every single country or every single jurisdiction. And it's bullshit that it's not, because everybody should have access to similar healthcare. We shouldn't have to be going third world countries and things like that, because, universal healthcare is something I think Australians take for granted a lot of the time, because we assume that everybody has that right in other countries. And I know as an Aussie, I would be like, oh, you should go and do this. And Americans kind of go, but I don't have insurance, or it's going to cost me several $1,000s. I had my child for free. It cost me nothing, absolutely nothing.
Whoa.
And if you go through the public healthcare system in Australia and you have a child, you pay for zilch. You don't have to pay hospital fees. You don't have to pay for the doctors as long as you go through the public system. You can get a private obstetrician. You can give birth in a private hospital, and things like that. However, there is a free option, and honestly, the public system, as far as being once you are in hospital, it's not the difference between private and public is not such a big difference for most people in most circumstances that you shouldn't be choosing the public option. Some people choose the private option because that's what they want. But if you go with a public option, particularly if it's something like giving birth, or it's something that a lot of people do a lot of the time and it's a routine system for that hospital, then a lot of for a vast majority of people, the experience can be quite positive. Even though I had some bad stuff happen while I was there, that had nothing to do with the care that I got leading up to giving birth or during the process, or that it was the stuff with the support systems afterwards. It wasn't about, I didn't have to worry about the money, but that's, again, not an option that a lot of people have, I can't even wrap my head around the American healthcare system. It just seems ludicrous to me that and I'm not bashing America at all, or Canada.
You should be, but yeah.
I don't want people to think I'm attacking them, but for a country as a whole, obviously, everyone's opinions are different, that likes to put themselves there as being progressive, in general being progressive and having everything that everyone should, come to America and have, all this experience. They can there are countries like America and other countries that can do better for their citizens for healthcare, and universal healthcare is not a dirty word. I just want to put it out there. It may not be perfect.
Preaching to the choir a little bit, but yeah.
I mean, it may not be perfect, and it has its faults, and it has a lot of things wrong with it. But, you know, like, how I don't know how much it would cost in, like, say, the US to have a child. Like, I've seen people post up on Facebook in, you know, parent groups about, you know, like, what they had to pay to give birth to their child, like, or, you know, for their procedure or what have you. And I'm just like, oh my God, like, I just go, like, and it's not a choice. There's no other option. You know, they don't have that choice. And I think that it's bullshit that they don't have the choice that I have. And I have to accept my privilege on that one because, you know, like, yeah, thousands, exactly, thousands. It costs thousands. But I have to be thankful for what I do get from Medicare, even if, you know, it can be peanuts for some procedures. You know, there are times where, you know, it's, you don't have to go, oh God, I don't know if I can afford to look after my health, you know, and being able to look after your health is so important. It really is. Being able to afford to and have access to, regardless of who you are or where you live, you know, everyone should have that inalienable right. You know, being able to take care of their needs, and not everybody has that. And I mean, man. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I that's why I didn't go private, because I couldn't have afforded it. You know, like, oh man.
Oh, for sure. I just want to
we're
add
getting
Cobra
soon.
Cobra
I'm just not
adds.
sure.
They couldn't answer these questions in a medical setting because it's already so overwhelming to try and get help. And then there's a lot of trauma from being denied or asked invasive questions, especially of a disability. Yeah, that's an intersection we didn't have time to touch on a lot. I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much to, you know, people who were watching, submitting questions. Thank you to Jade for modding, also Gemma and Cobra for being panelists. Really wonderful conversation. I'm so happy we were able to do this.
And thank you, Krista, for hosting.
Oh, thank you. Up next, we have two really exciting events. We have a panel on ACE Organizer frequently asked questions, and then also a online Discord discussion on healthy relationships.
And I will see you in healthy relationships.
Yes.
So I'm going to head over there.
Yeah. So you will catch, if you want to keep hanging out with me and Gemma, come to Healthy Relationships. It's going to be fun.
It will. It will. All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. It's been a really good chat. By all means, continue the discussions and conversations and what have you and topics on the Discord, and we will see you around.
Bye, guys.
Cheers. Bye.